including those used by the IPCC and the White House Climate Assessment for global temperature from 1975 to 2025. For the period 2000 to the present, how many of these models have accurately projected actual observed temperatures?
Well, that graph was to sum them, but I also have been in contact with John Christie, and he sent me other graphs that show in particular how the American U.S.-based models have done, and they haven't done any better. I can't speak to all of them. Actually, it's 102 model runs and about 34 models. But even the U.S. models don't do well at all. They don't even come close.
Yeah, on the figure I have in my written testimony that John Christie graciously provided me, you can see that a couple of models are close to what has been observed in the last 20 years, 15, 20 years, but by far the vast majorities have overstated the warming.
Well, why does it matter that these climate models have failed so frequently?
Well, it's one of the tests of the model. I mean, if you're going to use these models to try to predict what will happen in the next several decades, you want to have some confidence that they're robust tools. And I think the models have failed to show that. In fact, I think they've been a cause for a lot of the debate and discussion. And I think what Michael was saying, we don't probably need the models because the models are misleading us. They're talking about a future that may not occur. It certainly hasn't shown that the models are able to replicate what's happened in the last several decades. And so you wouldn't believe a weather prediction model that was forecast for tomorrow or the next day if it kept failing all the time. I think that's what we have with these climate models. They're not ready for prime time. Models are very useful. They understand processes. We can help to assimilate data. But as forecasting tools decades into the future, they're not ready.
Mr. Botkin, do you have any, or Dr. Botkin, do you have anything to add?
Yes. First of all, the models are well known not to be very well validated for at any level, and there's work such as by S. Scott Armstrong, who's an expert on model validation, mainly for businesses, and he says that these climate models meet hardly any of the criteria for legitimate validation, and so you have to question the validity of the model. And I say this having worked on some of the models. I had a graduate student added vegetation to one of the climate models as his PhD thesis. So I think that the models, since they are so much failing to come close and haven't been well validated, they're not a good guide now.
Well, we've used this 97% of scientists agree kind of number. Is it fair to say that close to 100% of scientists agree that our models are failures?
No, a lot of people, obviously they don't believe they're failures because they based the IPCC and the National Climate Assessment on it.
Let me be more specific, that for the time frame from 2000 to 2014 that they have failed.
I would think some would still disagree. They've been trying to explain how they can, why they're not agreeing, why there's less warming. They say now the warming has gone deeper into the ocean, for example, which obviously raises the question, if it's gone deeper in the ocean, why didn't they predict that? But I would think there are people that are still arguing the models are robust.
Well, now I'm looking at the graphs. Is this graph accurate?
Yes, the graph is accurate.
Well, the graph shows that the models don't correspond with actual temperatures. So how can people contend that the models are good if they're way off base with the temperatures, with the exception of perhaps one or two out of all the models being run? That
is an excellent question, but I think it's even broader than that because as I showed in my written testimony, there are a range of peer-reviewed papers that have shown when these models are run in the last several decades, they can't predict regional statistics well at all. They can't predict changes in regional climate statistics, and therefore there's a whole range of reasons they shouldn't be accepted. But the problem is this issue is not being discussed, and it wasn't discussed in the IPCC.
Let me conclude with this question. Former Vice President Al Gore recently gave an interview to Politico in which he stated that, quote, extreme weather events, end quote, are 100 times more common today than they were 30 years ago due to global warming. He also stated that these events are, quote, getting more frequent, more common, bigger, more destructive, end quote. Do you agree with this statement, and is it consistent with the state of the science? Dr. Bodkin first and Dr. Pelkey.
There is very good data, and Dr. Pelkey and his son can provide them, that show that the average rate of tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts are within the range of what's happened in the past. It's not extreme. And I would add that as a now resident of Florida, there hasn't been a major hurricane hit the mainland of Florida for 9 years, so somehow at least us in Florida are managing our climate.
Dr. Pelkey?
I would refer you to my son's testimony last summer to the Senate. I mean, it's an area he's an expert in, and he's commented quite a bit about this subject.
There was also another analysis that showed that if you looked over the Antarctic ice core data and then compared it to the recent changes, that the recent changes in climate are not outside the ranges of past climate. There's a published paper that shows that.
All right, Ms. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Toll, I think you've been clear about this, but I just want to make sure that I've understood. You would agree with the statement that climate change is caused, or at least partially caused by greenhouse gases, and that I think you said earlier, most scientists